my colleague Salma at the end of this will have the information for the CE credits and the PD credits as well. Thank you all for joining me again, and thank you for hanging in there. I'm going to go ahead and get started with what's next after the FAFSA. Like I mentioned, I am recording this session, so if you are interested in seeing the recording of the presentation, it'll be available to you all. If you are having trouble connecting through audio through your computer, if I sound staticky, if one of your colleagues is telling you that they cannot hear me, they just see my mouth moving, please have them use the call me feature. We will be using the Q&A feature to answer any questions. So that's going to be located on the bottom right corner of your screen. And with this, all of our upcoming webinars, this is a series of webinars that we have put together, are going to be available on our website. And like I mentioned as well, the continuing education credits, they are going to be available at the end of the webinar. So I'll go ahead and get started, and I won't keep you all past 12. So a little bit about ISAC, the Illinois Student Assistance Commission. We are the state agency that administers most of the financial aid programs for students here in the state of Illinois. Our mission is providing Illinois students with information and assistance to help make education beyond high school accessible and affordable. We also, like I mentioned, administer some financial aid programs. We do scholarships and grants, and that is what we administer, such things as the MAP grant and the Minority Teachers of Illinois. So grants and scholarships, we are the agency that administers that. Beyond administering the financial aid programs for students, we also provide professional development offerings with navigating the financial aid process, resources, any support for underrepresented students, and understanding student loan repayment forgiveness programs. So for the agenda, we're going to be going over confirmation and processing, financial aid output documents, and then verification and financial aid offers. For the first thing, we do have the ISAC FAFSA simplification page. I know that on here I have the 24-25 FAFSA. FAFSA simplification, everything, all of the updates have been the same as 24-25 cycle. So we do have the Department of Education does have the website up as well, and it'll have some frequently asked questions on the FAFSA itself. I know that this presentation is called What's Next After the FAFSA, and a lot of you are working with students that haven't even gotten through the FAFSA, right, with it opening a little bit later on in the year than what is October, right? So that website is still up. We also, I think I'll mention it, but we have, the Department of Education has the Federal Student Aid Workaround website, where if students are having an issue specific, I think with anything FAFSA related, but also with FSA related, FSAID related, the page is still up for workarounds. If you go on this page, there's still a couple of issues that were open since 2024, 2025 cycle that have not been resolved. So if you're working with a student and you've run into an issue with their FAFSA, if they can't put their contributors information, if they're coming back to make a correction and they are having to troubleshoot that, visit the website. More than likely, it could be that there is still an issue, and there's still workaround. Like I mentioned, I was working with a student last week, and there's still an issue that was open April 2024, and we used a workaround listed on that issue because it hasn't been resolved. With confirmation and processing, once the student does submit the FAFSA, they'll get into the confirmation and processing portion of it. They'll first receive a message letting them know, the student will letting them know that, hey, congratulations, your FAFSA form has been completed. It'll have a message of what happens next. The email is going to be sent. The student will receive notification of processing. So this is it being completed. The second part to this is going to be the actual FAFSA being processed. So once it is processed, they'll get that notification, and then the student will receive school communication. Ideally, if your student has applied to schools and been admitted to them and also have completed their FAFSA, they are more than likely at this stage, whether it be for verification, financial aid offers, whatever the student needs to provide the school. First, with the submission confirmation email, this is what the student will receive. We have a screenshot of what it'll look on the phone. It'll have the information on when it was submitted. This is going to be really important, especially for students who are looking to stay here in the state of Illinois and who are going to be MAP eligible. So with the submission date, the MAP grant uses the submission date as the date to hold the student's place in line to know if they're eligible for MAP, right? So we always talk about MAP grant being first come, first serve type of grant. So this is where we look at the submission date in order to know if that'll be the date that we can move forward with as to like who gets to receive the MAP grant and not be received after the MAP suspense date. So the submission date is going to be really, really important for that confirmation email. Most of you are joining us because you are part of our e-messaging system and you receive our e-messages and offerings. Just like with PD offerings, we also send out the MAP suspension date when it comes out. So submission date is going to be really helpful. The submission date for the MAP grant is also helpful to know that a couple of students or the feedback on a couple of FAFSAs has been that the student sees no record of their FAFSA. So if they have the confirmation email, we can look into, what's going on. So if they see no confirmation of their FAFSA on their dashboard, then, but they received the email, we can look into it. Before in the past, it used to be that if the student completed the FAFSA but didn't provide parent signature back when we didn't need all electronic signatures, when we had signature pages, what the student was able to submit their FAFSA. At this point, now coming forward to current times and looking at what is FAFSA simplification, that is no longer the case. So if the student completes their portion of the FAFSA, but the parent doesn't sign, that is not a submitted FAFSA. That means that the student completed their section, but not that the parent. So if the student is telling you like, hey, I completed my FAFSA and they did not receive a submission confirmation email, more than likely it could be that the parent needs to complete their section. Otherwise, it won't be considered submitted, which again, it's important for the MAP suspension date and to know that they're going to be eligible for those amounts as well. The confirmation email is going to have what's called the data release number. The data release number, think about it as the student's ID. So if they call a financial aid office, no matter what financial aid office they can call 3 different financial aid offices, one at UIC, one at Dominican, one at Trident College. No matter the financial aid office that they call, the data release number is going to be serve as their ID. So if they put the school as part of their FAFSA, they would be able to have more access to information with the data release number. It'll also include an estimated student aid index for the student, an SAI. In the screenshot that we have a negative 1,500, so it'll have that information. And then it'll let them know if they are eligible or might be eligible for any Pell amount. So you'll see that at the bottom. The thing with the confirmation email that we often get questions about is, why is there a Pell? How do we know if they're going to get MAP? Because the FAFSA is a federal form, we don't, it doesn't announce if they're eligible for MAP because all of the states use it. So it's not on here again, and that's just because it's a federal form. The way that they know that they're going to be eligible for MAP grant is once they start receiving their financial aid offers. A little bit more into what is the student aid index. So we are looking at what used to be the expected family contribution, the EFC, due to FAFSA simplification starting with the 24-25 school year, that has now changed to student aid index. It is meant to be a reflection of what the student and their family can contribute to their education. Just similar to what is the expected family contribution, it can be 0 and higher, but different from what it was the EFC, it can be as low as negative 1,500. On the back end of things, EFCs, they could have been negative. We just didn't see it on the front end as the customer or the student completing the FAFSA. But on the back end of things, there were students who could have had a negative EFC. So we just didn't see it. Now we're able to see it. And there are going to be a lot of individuals or students that you may work with that have a negative 1,500 SAI. For these individuals, it could be individuals who did not file taxes or were not required to file taxes. If both of the parents, the dependent students and independent students, if they're not required to file taxes, then it could be that they have a negative 1,500. But even when they are required to file taxes and they do file their taxes, you may be working with students whose SAI, student aid index, is negative 1,500. The way I think about it in my head when I'm looking at negative 1,500 SAI, it's what would be the equivalent of a 0 EFC, right? When we used to help students, when it used to be an EFC, if we saw a 0 EFC, it was a pretty good indicator that they would be eligible for the Pell Grant and the MAP grant. With the SAI, it may contribute to a student's Pell Grant eligibility, but it is not going to be the sole factor. There are other factors that will affect if the student is eligible for the Pell Grant. It won't just be the whatever number they get as their SAI. For the Pell Grant calculation and some of the things you'll see, what are some of the things that affect it? That's going to be students' family size, financial information, and the federal poverty guidelines. That's going to be used for overall the Pell Grant calculation. The students are going to be ranked or considered for the Pell Grant in the order of maximum Pell Grant, calculated Pell. With calculated Pell, that is where the SAI gets taken into consideration, because we will take the maximum Pell amount and then subtract the student aid index to get that calculated Pell. And then there will be students who will qualify for minimum Pell as well. If the student does not receive a Pell Grant amount from the calculation, they will not be eligible for the Pell Grant. I do want to give you all the heads up though with the submission email, the confirmation email that it was submitted. If they don't see a Pell Grant because they don't see an SAI, if they don't see a Pell Grant as well as SAI, it could be that the student maybe skipped the parent section, or you need to work a little bit further with the student. So that's also a good indicator that you can look into things with the student. With corrections, the student is able to make corrections to the FAFSA once the FAFSA has been processed. Prior to the FAFSA being processed, the student will not have access to make any corrections. And when we're talking about corrections, the things that we see the most often is that a student is going back to maybe change up a school. They can change information such as their email address. It's not too common unless they physically typed in all of the financial aid information themselves, that they have to go in and do that anymore, because they are going to be have to be putting confirming that the DDX does have consent for the IRS to have all of their information transferred over. With financial aid output documents, that's going to be the follow-up as to what they'll receive. We have what is the central processing system. The document that gets put out by FAFSA, all of the information that gets put through FAFSA, it does have to go through the central processing system where it goes through FAFSA data matching with other federal agencies. But it is for very specific reasons. For the Social Security Administration, we are looking, or not we, the system is looking to see if the student's Social Security number and student's U.S. citizenship match up to whatever they put on the FAFSA. With the Department of Homeland Security, that's going to be more for eligible non-citizen status. So if the student selects that they are an eligible non-citizen, just the student, it's not verifying any information for the parent, just for the student. If they select that they are eligible non-citizens, the Department of Homeland Security will confirm if they are the holders of a green card or of any other designations that would be an eligible non-citizen. Then we have the National Student Loan Data System, federal student loans that are going to be in default or in overpayment. If student loans are in default, then the student wouldn't be eligible for federal aid. So that is why it matches with that information, or it looks to match with that information. Then we have the Department of Veteran Affairs, just to and that is in the case that the student selected that they are a veteran, so that they can verify that information. And lastly, we have the Department of Defense. And this used to be for eligibility for Iraq and Afghanistan service grant. The Iraq and Afghanistan service grant is no longer a program, but it used to match that information into it. With the FAFSA submission summary, this is going to be the document, as you saw the screenshot at the beginning of this presentation, that's going to contain basic information about the student's eligibility for federal student aid. It's not going to be their financial aid offer. It's not going to be the end-all be-all. Again, it doesn't include the MAP grant because it's a federal form, so the FAFSA submission summary is going to include information about federal programs and not so much about state programs. It'll include the answers that were provided on the FAFSA by the student. It'll include the student aid index, and then the student will be able to receive the email and be able to access this information on their studentaid.gov account. Once the FAFSA has been processed. If they type in FAFSA.gov, they'll still have access to it. They're redirected to studentaid.gov automatically. So they'll be able to access all of the information on there. With the FAFSA submission summary, it looks a little bit different than the confirmation email. The FAFSA submission summary is going to have a different format. So we have outlined here on the inside of the red boxes. So we have the data release number, the student aid index, and if verification. So it's a little bit hard to see, but if you can zoom in on the student aid index, that's going to be the third line on the first square. You'll see that we have a student aid index of 000, then we see an asterisk, and we see a C. With that C, that's going to be the code for verification. If the student is selected for verification through FAFSA due to some data not matching with another federal agency, then they're going to see a code on their FAFSA submission summary. If the student doesn't see an asterisk and a code, it doesn't mean that they're not selected for verification. The student can be selected for verification if the school or the institutions they apply to have a certain criteria for having individuals provide an additional part of documents or just as security to make sure that the money is going to the right individual. So if you do see it on the FAFSA submission summary, yes, they are selected for verification because something doesn't match. If you don't see it on here and then you're talking to a student and they let you know that, hey, I was selected for verification, which I'll touch on in a minute, just know that it doesn't mean that because we don't see an asterisk on the submission summary that the student will automatically not have to provide anything else. We'll then have the date that it was received. This is important for the MAP grant here in the state of Illinois. And then it'll let them know of their application status. As you can see, the last box we have on here that we outline in red, it says your FAFSA has been selected for verification. Verification is a process where your school confirms the data you reported on your FAFSA. Your school has the authority to contact you for documentation that supports income and other information you reported on your FAFSA. So that is the message that they received. With the output documents that also get put out, it's going to be the Institutional Student Information Record, or ISIR. This is going to be information from the student's FAFSA, what gets provided to the institution. So this is available for the institutions that the student listed and was admitted to on their FAFSA. It'll contain common codes explaining the results of the process FAFSA. It will contain information if any errors were found. It'll contain all of the details from the information that was reported on the FAFSA. And I think the most significant, or what is used from financial aid administrators, and is going to be the student aid index, so that they are able to not just look into what federal programs the students are eligible for, but also for their institutional programs. A lot of institutions do use the student aid index. Coming back to verification, so for a lot of what was released in the 24-25 year, with the guidance from federal student aid, it's going to carry over into the 25-26 years. So they have shared that there are going to be some leniencies when it comes to what the students are selected for verification for. I think a big one of those is going to be tax information. They are still figuring out how to ensure that all individuals who file their taxes are able to have access to the DDX, and then also be able to actually have their information transferred over. I know that a couple of individuals, mixed status families, if the parent contributor has an I-10, if they are looking to use the DDX, even if they file their taxes, they have their I-10, they have all of their information, they might be able to provide consent, but they still have to enter their information manually. Once that gets processed, because they did provide that consent, the information should be transferred over from the DDX, but initially they do have to report that information manually. With having all of the information be transferred over from DDX, that is one thing that for the 24-25 year and moving forward is going to hopefully reduce the amount of students that get selected for verification to confirm any financial information. It doesn't mean that you won't run into it. You might have an instance where a student's parents their current, let's say their marital status changed, right? 2 years ago, they were married, they were filing taxes as married, and now they are single. That there might be instances where they'll have to follow up with the institutions. But the DDX, the intent behind it is to really help reduce the amount of students that are selected for verification for their financial information. Some of the verification items that a student could be selected for, it could be family size, it could be the number enrolled in college. So as you may know, there's a question on the FAFSA that's asking how many students in the parent's household or family size are going to be in college for the 25-26 school year. So depending on what that answer is, that is something that could be verified or information that can be verified. It could be information about U.S. income taxes, paid or untaxed income benefits. It could be non-tax filers' income earned from work, or any identity statements of for educational purposes. So if the student has received financial aid in the past and it happened to be at another institution, this is where we see it the most often, just so that institutions make sure that they're not awarding the same student at 2 different institutions at the same time. For some of the examples of acceptable documentation, and these are examples, every institution is going to have their own agreement with the Department of Education as to if they are selecting a student to verify their family size, what documents are needed. So every institution is going to have their own agreement with the Department of Education, but for the most part, this can be an average list that they may have. For family size, an institution might ask for a signed statement. Anytime you see signed statement, it's literally just a statement to include the name, age, and the age of the household members, the relationship to the applicant, and then just pretty much confirming that the family size that was reported on the FAFSA is still accurate. Again, this can be in the case, let's say parent was married 2 years ago, family size that was reported was a lot larger from their taxes to what it is now, and this is you confirming it. It can also be for number enrolled in college, signed statement, including the names of the students that are going to be in college, the institutions that the students are going to be attending, and it'll probably also be if the institution has their own institutional statement, which a lot of institutions do have, it'll just be signing that institutional statement. For identity statements of for educational purposes, it can be a signed statement certifying that the federal student aid received will only be used for educational purposes, and also a valid government photo identification. I personally have not worked with any students who were selected for identity statement for educational purposes, but if you ever work with a student that does have that, please reach out to us and we can assist as best as we can. Then we have examples of acceptable documentation. This will be also for U.S. income tax paid. Some of the items that the student is able to provide, or the parents to the financial aid office that they'll accept, it can be the tax return transcript. The tax return transcript usually has all of the information that was included as part of the taxes, most of the information that was included as part of the taxes, and these are free for the tax filer to be able to request. It can be done online. It can be done through the phone. So the tax return transcript is the free way to getting information on taxes. Then we also have tax account transcripts. These are going to be commonly asked for those who amended their tax return. So if they made any changes, or even if the IRS on the back end of things updated and amended anything on behalf of the tax filer, the tax account transcript would include this information. And then a lot of the time, schools can ask or accept for a signed copy of the tax return. For the non-tax filers, this is going to be those who did not file taxes. The school can ask for a W-2. They can ask for the verification of non-filing. This is a letter that the IRS can provide to a tax filer or a non-tax filer. Literally, the verification of non-filing letter is just a letter stating that, hey, yes, X individual did not file taxes. We don't have any records of, because we're looking to report 2023 information, we don't have any records of 2023 taxes for this individual. So that is there. For the DDX, it is also meant to reduce the amount of people that get selected for verification for these purposes, because on the back end of things, even if you did not file taxes, if you select or give approval for DDX, consent for the DDX to transfer all of your information over from the IRS, it'll let the FAFSA know that, yes, confirming that there are no taxes for this individual. It could also be a signed statement certifying that the individual is not required to file taxes. Be mindful that there's when working with students, there's a difference between not being required to file taxes and just being required to file taxes and not filing them at all. You want to make sure that if they are non-tax filers and they are getting verified for income, that if they are going to be eligible for financial aid, that it is in the case that they didn't file taxes because they didn't meet the required IRS filing threshold. Because if they did meet the filing threshold for the IRS, then it means that they will have to file taxes in order for them to be eligible for financial aid. Then we have sources and amounts of income earned from work as reported on the FAFSA. So if you selected that you did not file taxes, but yet you did have sources of income, they can accept this. It can be paycheck stubs, it can be whatever form the school will ask the student for. Now, a couple of other process, not just with verification, we have the professional judgment process. Professional judgment overall is going to be the authority of a school's financial aid administrator, being able to make an adjustment in the data elements in the cost of attendance or the student aid index calculation, and adjust the student's dependency status. Dependency status is the thing that we see the most often with professional judgment. I think especially working with students who are going from high school to college, the dependency status professional judgment process is the one that we see the most often. For special circumstances and unusual circumstances, the financial aid administrator, they're able to adjust data elements based on adequate documentation. So again, dependency status is one of the common ones. If there has been changes to income, that's another common one. If there's additional medical expenses that the student is going through and it will affect their school, it can be something that the financial aid administrator can make decisions on. It is something that is done on a case-by-case basis. So every individual case is looked at individually. So it's not like, hey, we have a batch of students, they're looking to all have dependency status changes. Let's either decline them all or approve them all. It's going to be something that the financial aid administrator does have to look at individually. They have to look at the documentation individually, the circumstance individually to be able to make that decision. The choice is going to be at the discretion of the institution's financial aid administrator. It is not something that there's an appeal process for. So if the financial aid administrator says, hey, we are not overriding the student's dependency status, they are going to be considered dependent, it's not something that you can follow up with the Department of Education or even with ISEC, because we are not the Department of Education, to have an appeal proceedings for it. And then with documentation, the one thing that financial aid administrators do have to be mindful of when they make the decision is that there is sufficient documentation or evidence to justify that there was an adjustment made to the elements of the FAFSA on behalf of the student. And this is in the case that they are audited by the Department of Education. With professional judgment is going to be the umbrella term, and under professional judgment, we're going to have two categories, one of them being special circumstance and the other one unusual circumstance. With special circumstances, those are going to be data adjustments to any elements within the cost of attendance or in the FAFSA that can impact the student aid index calculation. So the way that a student's financial need gets calculated is that the cost of attendance, you take the cost of attendance, subtract the student aid calculation, whatever that is, and then the financial aid administrator works with the student in order to meet that financial need. Now, with special circumstances, they're able to make those data element adjustments to even the cost of attendance. So I mentioned medical expenses, maybe transportation expenses. Within cost of attendance, we have an average of what expenses the student should expect to have to make as they're in college. But let's say the cost of attendance has a very low transportation expense calculated in there, and the student had a larger expense on there. They are able to file a professional judgment or an appeal to see if the cost of attendance can be adjusted so that the student can receive more financial aid, whether that be loans or other scholarships. Then we have unusual circumstances. This is going to be the adjustment of the student's dependency status based on a unique situation. So just this is going to be more the one that we see the most often, especially again, high school to college, where maybe a student has no contact with the parents or living with a family member, and they can't say yes to any of the dependency questions that are being asked on the FAFSA, but we know that they have a special circumstance. The school also cannot maintain a policy of denying all professional judgment requests. The schools are required to have a list of adequate documentation that can be used for making the request. But other than that, it is also, whether it be a special circumstance or an unusual circumstance, it is going to be something that is seen or looked at on a case-by-case basis. Lastly, with financial aid offers, we are looking into financial aid offers. One thing to note is that although the Department of Education regulates a lot of things, they do not regulate or have like a template that every school has to use when they're looking into the financial aid offer. So there is no set format for that financial aid offer. Students will receive multiple financial aid offers, and they will not be or include the same items, or not include the same items. They will not look the same. There is one thing that they can look for. They can look for the source and the type of financial aid that's being offered to them. The terms of enrollment for that financial aid package. One of them is probably the one that I see the most often working with high school students, is when they get offered like a housing stipend or a housing scholarship, and then they don't, and the student's not planning to live on campus, right? So you want to make sure that you look at the terms of enrollment for that. And then the total financial aid that is being offered to the student. We do have on our student portal what is the financial aid comparison tool. This is a great tool. It's one of my favorite tools. There's a version that can be printed out so that you can work through it with students, or it can be something that you work on it online. Personally, I recommend that you work on it online. Online, you're able to compare up to 3 schools at a time, and then you're able to print the results. So if you are working with a student that has 9 financial aid offers, they can look into doing 3 batches of 3 schools at a time and printing those results. With the tool, it does help the student align the language from every financial aid offer. So it'll ask the student to list out the cost of attendance, right? So then the student has to go into the financial aid offer and identify cost of attendance. It'll ask if they're receiving if they're eligible for any federal aid based on the financial aid offer. So it'll call out the Pell Grant, it'll ask FACOG, it'll ask about student loans as well, it'll ask about work study. It'll also ask the student to identify the student aid index. And then once it gets to the loan part, it also gets into the parent loans. If they were offering any Parent Plus loans, which I'm sure most of you know that a lot of financial aid offers do include a hefty amount of Parent Plus loans. At the end of using the comparison tool, they are able to get into, again, the results of comparing those 3 financial aid offers. The thing I really, really love about this tool is that with parent loans and even student loans, it does multiply that amount by 4 years. I think this is really important when working with parents. Oftentimes they think, yes, I'll take out a $20,000 loan for my student, but that is putting things into perspective that it's not just going to be the first year. So if we're comparing 9 financial aid offers and one of those offers or 2 have Parent Plus loans being offered to the student, then we're able to identify that and compare all 9 of them. So instead of comparing apples to oranges, we are putting students at a place where they are comparing apples to apples. Some things to keep in mind when you're looking into financial aid offers. Again, whether you use the tool or not, you want to know what is the cost of attendance. So helping the student identify what is the cost of attendance. You want to help the student identify and somewhat understand the concept of their student aid index. They want to look at what is their aid eligibility. With aid eligibility is what are they eligible for? Are they eligible for a lot of grants? Are they eligible for a lot of scholarships? Are they being offered more self-help type of aid? What is their aid eligibility? If you look at the student aid index and you see a negative number and you see that they're not being offered what is considered a need-based program, so a program that is based on the student's financial need, based on their information on the FAFSA, that should tell you what is their financial aid eligibility. They want to look into to see if their financial need was met. After you take the cost of attendance, you take the student aid index. Sometimes I don't really take the student aid index, right? Because that's expecting, if it's a positive number, that is assuming that the parent or the family upfront can put that number. So sometimes when I work with students, if they have a positive student aid index, then I don't include that as part of it. Was their financial need met? Cost of attendance, if they do have that student aid index, if it's positive, adding that on there. And then after being packaged everything in their financial aid offer, does that mean that everything was met? Can the student enroll in school and have no problems once the fall comes? What types of aid are included, gift versus self-help aid. Ideally, we do think that a financial aid offer that has more gift aid, money that they do not have to pay back, is something that we aim for the students to be able to obtain rather than self-help aid. And then we have what is my out-of-pocket cost, looking into the financial aid offer, whether my financial need was met or not, what is going to be my actual cost that I'm going to have to or expect to pay throughout the course of that 1 year. Some things to consider. I already mentioned this one, ratio of gift aid to self-help aid. Generally, packages with more gift aid and with more gift aid than loans are going to be more appealing for students. This means that the student will not have to be in debt, does not have to pay back that money. It is going to be if they meet the minimum requirement of the gift aid, which MAP Grant, Pell Grant usually is maintaining a 2.5 GPA. Then they won't have to pay that much money back. And then how much of the cost of attendance will you have to pay? I think with this is also, once you're looking into that financial aid offer, how much do you have to pay up front? So looking at beyond loans, because yes, loans have to be repaid, but you do have a certain amount of time to start paying those back. How much do I have to, or should I be considering to have or have ready to pay throughout the school year? With cost of attendance, I recommend that you even go through what is included in cost of attendance and explaining direct and indirect costs to the student. Direct costs being costs that absolutely have to be paid to the institution in order for the student to be able to enroll, versus indirect costs. It could be miscellaneous expenses, it can be books, supplies, transportation, anything that the student can work around those prices in order for them to be able to go to school. They also, if there are any loan terms, looking at those loan terms, if there is a financial aid gap, so if there is anything from, let's say that the cost of attendance is $75,000 and looking at everything within the financial aid offer is $50,000, then we are looking to looking at the financial aid gap, what's missing, those $20,000. Even if the $50,000 includes loans, how am I going to be able to make it? Then we have future packages as well. Is all or part of the award renewable? A lot of institutions within their financial aid offers, they do include institutional scholarships that may be for students who are first years, or it may be students who are in sports. It could be, I mentioned earlier, the housing scholarship. So is all of this going to be renewable? Are they, the Pell Grant, the MAP Grant, we know that that's going to be based on the student's financial need, but anything else being awarded to the student, is that going to be renewable? And if the student apply for outside scholarships, making sure that they do have access to all of those, that all of the scholarships are listed out in the financial aid offer. With disbursement and ensuring that the student does get their financial aid money, the student needs to meet the following requirements: submit all paperwork and information required. This won't be the case for every student. You might work with students who do not need to provide any additional paperwork or information, but they at least have to, with submitting all paperwork, this will be more for if the student is selected for verification or anything of that sort. They are going to have to accept all of the awards. So this means that even student loans, scholarships, whatever they are going to accept from that financial aid offer, that they're going to have to do, especially when we're talking about student loans, because they do have to let the institution that they are interested in those loans. Complete entrance counseling, and this is going to be for those students who are thinking of taking out loans or who are taking out loans, indeed. They have to make arrangements to clear any holds set on the student account. So if there is anything that they need to provide, maybe it's that $100 deposit at the beginning of the year, whatever hold they have, that they take care of that. If there are any past due charges that in the student account, those do have to pay, especially if there are any past due charges for tuition and mandatory fees, in order for them to know that they can enroll into classes. They also have to enroll in classes and meet satisfactory academic progress. I mentioned that 2.5 GPA. That's going to be really important. A lot of students do lose eligibility for need-based financial aid programs such as the Pell Grant and the MAP Grant if they are not making or meeting satisfactory academic progress. And then how the money gets dispersed, it might vary depending on the institution or the type of financial aid. So that is going to differ, but for the most part, it usually tends to be between the first or second week of the semester that the money does get dispersed to the student or to the student's account. Great. So I am coming to the end of the presentation today. As promised, we do have our CE and PD available for you all today. Selma just shared the SurveyMonkey, that the evaluation that has to be completed through SurveyMonkey in order to be eligible for those. So if you can complete those, please do so. I'll leave the chat open. I'll stop recording. Thank you all for attending with us today and your patience. And yeah, we'll see.